get us started. Hello, everybody. I am Lauren Landis. I am the Hampton Roads Field Coordinator for Chesapeake Climate Action Network. It is lovely to see you all. I'm going to introduce the rest of our facilitators in just a moment, but I just wanted to start out with some welcome and some admin. So first of all, an important note, this event is being recorded. It's currently recording already. So if you're not comfortable with that, please go ahead and turn your camera off. We'll be recording the intro, the beginning part of this event, and then turning off the recording when we all break out into, when we all transition into breakout rooms. I also wanted to ask everyone to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your pronouns if you're comfortable, your location. And also, is this your first time joining Comment Party? This is the public participation comment writing party. And just want to see if this is everyone's first time and experience. The chat will be monitored throughout the event by Xander, who will introduce himself in a moment. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put your questions or comments there in the chat. He'll be responding to them. You're also welcome to raise your hand either electronically or physically, and we will call on you whenever we have a moment when is appropriate in the agenda. And then finally, please stay on mute to minimize background noise. I know it's the evening. You might hear my little 5-year-old running around and people might be making dinner and things like that. So please just stay on mute so that we can all hear the speaker as they are talking. So I think that is most of the admin, I think is everything. I see some introductions going in the chat. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to the other facilitators so they can introduce themselves briefly before we get going. Xander.
Hi, my name is Xander Pellegrino. I am Lauren's colleague at Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Northern Virginia organizer. And I can turn it over to Jess.
Hey, so happy to see everybody this evening. I'm Jess Sims. I'm the Virginia Field Coordinator for Appalachian Voices. I am based in Richmond. I use she, her pronouns, and excited to be back at a comment party. Thankful for y'all's attendance. I'll pass it to Grace.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. I'm Grace Tuttle, she, her pronouns. I'm the coordinator at Protect Our Water Heritage Rights Coalition, which is a multi-state coalition in West Virginia and Virginia. And our main objective for now is fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So glad to be here and glad to work on some comments with y'all.
Thank you so much, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and just start sharing my screen. So give me just a minute to get that looking correct. Always takes me longer than I think it will. Okay, give me a big thumbs up if you're seeing what I'm looking at. Awesome. Okay, so the first thing is we want to just give a little bit of context as to why we are here. So who are we commenting to? So we are commenting to the DEQ, which stands for the Department of Environmental Quality, the Air Board, the Waste Board, and the Water Board. Now these are, and excuse me, I'm just pulling up the slides on my own phone as well so I can see my notes. These are various boards and government entities that have a lot of different authority and permissions to oversee various environmental permits. If this isn't your first time doing a comment, then you've likely addressed one of these boards before, and you know kind of the drill of doing a technical comment, a public comment. So that's what we're doing today. If you have any specific questions about any of those boards, we can't get into a lot of particulars about them tonight, but just wanted to give you a little bit of background as to who we're writing to. So what are we commenting on? So right now we're talking about a set of regulations that legally guides how these groups do public engagement. So there is identical text among all the groups, but different Virginia code chapters. It is currently up for periodic review, but there's no recommended changes, which does make it a little bit difficult just because, they're kind of asking you to open-ended tell them what they should do better, which can be hard. But that's why we're going to be walking through some different examples of what that might look like, and just the way a direct comment is best. Oh, I see that Kay is just joining us. So I'm just going to pause for a second and see if any of my facilitators want to provide any additional context on, who we're commenting to and what we are commenting on.
This is Jess from App Voices. I'll just mention, as Lauren said, a lot of us have engaged with these specific boards over the years. And they really are unique in that these are the entities that are citizen boards that are supposed to act as the voice for the citizen population. And to mention also that the comment period that we are talking about tonight was presented to the public with the absolute minimum initially. And so we're anticipating that that can be one of the asks of regulatory or permitting processes going forward, is more time for the public to even know about these. And a decision in one space seems to impact the other spaces too. Extending the deadline for one of the boards required extending it for all of them. So there is some collaboration at the regulatory level for these boards too.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jess. I do also just want to add that, these boards are ready to currently receive comments on these set of regulations, and this will really legally bind them on how they need to solicit public comment, communicate with Virginians, and incorporate the public comment. So it's very important. This will determine how your voice is heard, which if you have written a comment before and after today, you'll be able to say that you have, that there's sort of a lot of minutia that governs how your voice can be heard, and updating these participation regulations will improve that process. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So today we need to be quite specific in what these participation regulations, what these guidelines relate to. So there are two kind of different decisions when we're talking about these different bodies. The first is a permitting decision, and the second is a regulatory decision. Now it can be a little bit confusing when you're thinking about what these guidelines apply to. So we do have some examples. So first of all, as you can see on the left, a great example of a permitting decision is the Lambert compressor station. This permitting decision received a threshold of public comments, and the decision for that permit was then elevated to the Air Board. As some of y'all might know, that Air Board hearing was scheduled, what month is it? I think for last month. And now that decision has been rescheduled for September 17th, that hearing. So that's an example of a permitting decision. Now, the DEQ is only receiving comments on how it will do public engagement for regulatory decisions, not permitting decisions. So that's a helpful distinction. So examples of some regulatory decisions is the 401 permit for the ACP. In this situation, public pressure really mattered. In response to the demands of thousands of organized Virginians, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the DEQ, in 2018 created an entirely new process by which the agency reviewed the water quality impacts of the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines. Instead of completely handing over review responsibility to the Federal Army Corps of Engineers, the DEQ instead developed its own process for review under federal and state clean water laws. After successfully demanding a thorough public process, we and many others on this call participated in that process. Hundreds turned out over the summer to testify at hearings on the pipelines, and on the day that the public comments were due, over 10,000 comments per pipeline, for a total of about 20,000 comments, were delivered to the DEQ. This organized public resistance was one of the thousands of cuts that led to the cancellation of the MPP and has similarly put it to the cancellation of the ACP and has similarly put the MVP on shaky ground. So that's an example of a regulatory decision, which is what we're talking about today. Another example that I'm going to ask one of my co-facilitators to put in the chat, just for time's sake, is a great site suitability example. So we'll give that as well. Kind of related to RGGI, before the Virginia legislature passed a mandate for Virginia to be a part of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the DEQ passed regulations to join it on its own. And that's an example where CCAN and many others advocated for this. So that's another good example of a regulatory decision. An important EJ note is that fighting individual permits, we like to say, is like playing whack-a-mole with both pollution and NIMBYism, which for those that aren't familiar with that term, it's not in my backyard. Somebody who is all for something unless it's being built in their community. But getting input on the code is helpful, and it is really important when advancing environmental justice. So that's just an important distinction and some context for what we're talking about today. Again, regulatory decisions, not necessarily permitting decisions. Any clarification that needs to be offered from my co-facilitators on that? And I can't see y'all, so I need to assume hearing none and move on. So now I'm going to turn it to Jess to share with us some specific strategies that we'll be referencing today and that we use in general. Take it away, Jess.
Thanks, Lauren. So the overall thought is that these are regulatory decisions, but they're rooted in real life, and the impacts of how they come to be have real life impacts. So that leaves us to ask, what's next? The regulatory process, even looking through the DEQ website and through all the kind of information about the comment period, it's dense, it's opaque. But that result in the decision-making process that happens has real life impacts on all of our communities' health, our air, our water, our land. So addressing this opportunity to comment and to see and suggest and help implement changes in the processes of the Virginia DEQ and the citizen boards is a chance for a series of combined strategies. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So from site suitability determinations, like Lauren mentioned, that could mean based on how the current regulation is for site suitability. Right now, Virginia has one for air. They do not have one for water, but there is a regulatory review right now for the site suitability determinations for air things that would require an air permit. It means that piece of infrastructure may or may not be proposed for your community based on those site suitability determinations. For determining turbidity standards for Virginia's water, which is one I know we're all very interested in. We don't have numeric turbidity standards here in Virginia. So that process, which has a NOIRA and public comment and a regulatory panel that reviews that has real life impacts. It's the source of your own drinking water that could be impacted by turbidity. And although they have this start in this kind of nebulous regulatory atmosphere, they have direct real world consequences. So the strategies we want to talk about tonight are twofold, and they can help put the most important information, which is directly from community members in front of decision makers. And then the second part is to reinforce community concerns and provide additional technical and legal recommendations to help incorporate those changes. So the first step is community participation, and I want to say thank you. You've already taken that first step by joining us this evening. The process cannot improve and connect the reality of how everything impacts communities without the agencies and boards hearing from everyone around the state. So one of tonight's goals is to demystify that process and provide talking points, info, and support for you to more easily share your personal experience, to draft your own personalized comment, to sign on to existing action alerts from other partners, and to know more about what happens with the process. What happens after comments are submitted? What happens when they form a regulatory advisory panel, which is open to the public to participate in? The other component of making improvements to the public participation guidelines for regulatory decisions comes from organizations, some of whom are represented here tonight, from across the state that want to see that process improved. So partners have created technical comments outlining which portions of the code need to be improved, collaborated together to draft an organizational sign-on letter. And with what may happen, and has happened in other spaces like the turbidity panel or site suitability, organizations can participate and advocate for certain changes by being part of a RAP, which is a regulatory advisory panel. So the goal of Organizational participation is to support and reinforce the concerns of the community of the public. So Lauren is going to show you a bit behind the curtain in the next slide of the regulatory language and how the process.
Thanks, Jess. Yep, let's get into that. So here is an example of some state regulation language which at first blush seems, very technical, very hard to get into, but we're going to just use it as an exercise really quickly. So again, I can't see anybody, I apologize. Could somebody come off mute? We're going to do a little bit of public participation in this slide. And would anybody be willing to read subpoint A for me?
I will.
Thank you.
The agency shall maintain a list of persons who have requested to be notified of regulatory actions being pursued, oh, that's a good word, by the agency.
Thank you. I think that was Kay. Thank you, Kay. Can anybody come off mute and read for me section B?
I can. B, any person may request to be placed on a notification list by registering as a public user on the town hall or by making a request to the agency. Any person who requests to be placed on a notification list shall elect to be notified either by electronic means or through a postal carrier.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. And section C, last one.
I'll go. The agency may maintain additional lists for persons who have requested to be informed of specific regulatory issues, proposals, or actions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Meredith. So as you can see, when y'all read that out, not so difficult, actually, pretty clear. This is an example of a section of language that organizations like Jess was talking about, environmental advocacy organizations, are combing through to suggest line by line recommendations of what can be approved. Now, does anybody notice perhaps a word that is used several times and in each clause? And if nobody does, I'll give it to you. We don't need to make it a long exercise.
Requested.
Requested, Kay. Yes. So you should notice that in each of these things, the burden is placed on the community member. You have to request to be notified. You have to request to be added to a list. You have to request to be informed. So this is a place where our alarm bells go off in the environmental advocacy world and say, we want this to put the burden back on DEQ, back on the organization. We want there to be a proactive effort on the part of the DEQ to seek out EJ communities, to compile a list of these communities, and the burden is placed on them to reach out to them. There should be specific outreach and language stipulations. Their communications materials must be in Spanish. They must not rely just on communications that rely on internet, on broadband. They should be, doing outreach in schools and faith centers and community centers. So this is language that, it's not very difficult. It is understandable, but how many people know about this? How many people know that they need to opt in? How many people know that town hall exists and what it's for and how to be a public user on it? So these are examples where we would, as environmental advocacy groups, write in a technical comment with suggestions on how to amend this language. So that's an example of what Jess was talking about in terms of organizational advocacy before we turn to your very important individual advocacy that we are supporting. Do any of my facilitators, other facilitators need to add in on that? Okay, moving right along. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jess.
Thanks, Lauren. And so the component that really runs through all of this is something that has not been a priority for the Department of Environmental Quality. And it's something that has been a priority to a lot of you that are here in attendance tonight, and that is addressing environmental injustice across the state. So the broader message is that now is a great time to put in comments for public participation, for outreach that is meaningful, and outreach and guidelines that center environmental justice in communities and all of these processes. The DEQ has made a system where they have seemed unwilling to listen to those types of concerns. They have not been equipped to, and were not proactively doing so. And they most certainly had not incorporated environmental justice into their internal processes. Subsequently, they are part of the long track record of environmental injustice in the state. So the response came from the public, and thanks to y'all, they were asked to prioritize environmental justice, and the General Assembly mandated certain requirements to the DEQ through things like the Environmental Justice Act in the 2020 session. So just wanted to give you some kind of context of what's going on organizationally at the DEQ right now as they try to implement environmental justice into their agency, and many agencies within the state government do the same subsequently. So the DEQ has recently hired an environmental justice director, Director Renee Hoyos, and they are currently hiring for 4 community outreach specialists across the Commonwealth. So one of the things we really want to highlight is that with all of these processes and all of these comment periods, receiving ample comments shows DEQ staff that the community wants environmental justice prioritized and they want public participation prioritized. Essentially, DEQ is not going to proactively take this on. And so that's why a robust response is always needed to remind them of what their duties are and what our priorities are too. A robust response would also indicate to the DEQ that 4 specialists may not be enough. There's so many regulatory decisions, infrastructure projects, requested permits across the Commonwealth, and for them to really incorporate EJ into their internal processes, they need a large staff. A robust public response can also show that there needs to be longer processes of reviewing existing regulations. And this is an example of one. They wanted to give the public 21 days to not know about this because the burden, like Lauren said, is placed on the public to know about these comment periods, and only wanted to give 21 days for folks to weigh in. And so this is an example of where they need to improve both the framing of what they do and the actual processes that they're using. So that's where they are with environmental justice. You can probably look to the next General Assembly session to see stronger improvements trying to be made to that process. Excuse me. And so I want to put it over to Grace, who's going to talk about some of the things you've heard earlier in the presentation, but what some of the content can be for your personalized statement to these boards and agency tonight. Grace?
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so I'm going to try to demystify some of the things that you might be able to say in these comments. And the way that this slide is organized is not necessarily the way that you need to go about making your comment, but on the screen right now are talking points that pertain directly to the sections of code that are under review right now. So you can kind of see, this is not an exhaustive list of the sections, but you know, the notification list for regulatory action, that specific section's under review, public hearings on regulatory actions, appointments of regulatory advisory panels, and public comments on those actions. So what I've done here in this slide is kind of given you some questions to frame the way that you can think about these talking points. So if you're looking at a regulation or you're thinking about public participation, you can kind of say, for example, with the notification list, okay, so they have the concept of a notification list. So what you're thinking is who should be on it and what information should they receive? And that's the frame from which you can use these talking points. And when we sort of split off and start writing our comments, there's a few comment guides with lists of talking points that you can kind of sit with and think about, because it's a little bit overwhelming to think about all 4 entities, the DEQ and the 3 citizen boards that we're going to be commenting to. So you can sit with CCAN's comment talking point guide, as well as Sierra Club's, as well as the independent contractor study nicknamed the SKIO report that Jess referenced, which has a litany of recommendations in it. So again, the CCAN talking points document, which we will have a chance to look at when we sort of simmer down to write comments, is has a little bit more general and I would call ambitious chunks of things that you could choose to incorporate into your comment. And then the Sierra Club comment guide is more of these technical recommendations that pertain to the sections of code that are up for review. And as we have said, but important to repeat, using your personal experience or an experience that you know of or a relation to your community or why this is important to you is probably the most important thing to weave in with whatever comment or whatever talking points speak to you the most, and whatever sections of code or whatever things that you wish to speak on and recommend. That using your personal narrative, weaving that in and customizing it is the best way to get their attention. So again, I know this is just a bunch of text on this slide, but don't worry, we'll have time to sit with both CCAN and Sierra Club's talking points and craft some comments. So thanks for bearing with that explanation, and hope it's starting to make a little bit of sense. And if not, don't worry, because it's a bear. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Grace. And yes, Grace is so right. And we keep sort of giving you a lot of talking points and a lot of information, and then reeling it back and saying, but don't forget, your story is the most important. And that's not a contradiction. That's true. You know, we see that a lot in when people are giving written testimony or technical comment. Yes, facts and figures and technical language is important, but the personal story is what really lends it color. So an example of this is Xander was speaking with Renee Hoyes earlier, and she described reading through the public comments from inside the DEQ and saying how she looks for individual and personalized stories, and explicitly stated that copy and pasted talking points, no matter how well researched, are no substitute for Virginia residents' experiences. So, you know, these talking points and these different resources are so helpful because it shows that, you know, even if you don't personally have an experience, you know, anybody can write a public comment. And this is true of any of these opportunities that our organizations send out in action alerts. You know, we always give you language, you know, no one's flying blind, but really the most valuable information is your own experiences. The reason that that's also really important is because that, you know, the DEQ and these different boards, they're made up of people. They're made up of, you know, a lot of times people are allies to our organizations, and they're made up of supervisors and managers. And the more comments that they receive with these impassioned voices of Virginians, the more they're likely to turn to their higher ups and turn to their supervisors and say, we need more staff for this, or we need more prioritization of environmental justice and community outreach. So that's why it's so important. So we're going to go ahead and give y'all an opportunity to marry this all together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment so that I can see y'all. Oh, hello. And I'm going to break us out into two groups, I believe. Oh, Xander, go right ahead.
Well, let's, I wanted to address Meredith's point in the chat real quick.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't see the chat.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that actually relates to something we're going to talk about. Right now, some of the regulations are written so that if there are, for example, 25 comments on a particular proposed regulation, then it automatically gets another layer of review. But that's just about the only clarity that we have about what the agencies will do with our stories that we share with them. And so maybe something that people often say is that they would really love to hear clarity and a clear line between how many voices are say no is enough before people are listened to. And another way to say that is, what will be done with these comments? How will they be incorporated? How will their content be used? And what impact will they have? And that's something that you could absolutely write in as a suggestion for regulation. And then the other thing that I wanted to do before breakout rooms was open it up for questions that the whole group may have before we do that.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, with such a small group, feel free to just come off mute if you have a question. And there, of course, will be ample time in our breakout room as well. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and split us into 2 breakout rooms. It's either going to be 2 separate rooms and I'll be all by my lonesome here in the main room, or I'll leave half of you back with me. So I'm just gonna check real quick. Nope, it wants to send you all to one room. So I'm gonna make 2 real quick.
I'm sorry, I just.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Anne.
Sorry, I formulated a question I have.
No, that's perfect.
Thinking about the 25 number to get another layer of review, and then there were 10,000, then up to 20,000. That just looks like a massive response with having it be in comments. I wondered if there's a way that phone calls or other kinds of information is folded in, or does it have to go through some portal, comment portal somehow to be part of the count?
That's such a good question. It looks like Jess may have an answer.
I'll share that when there is an opportunity for a public hearing, they include a verbal comment that's submitted as part of that count, but there's not a way outside of that public hearing that I'm aware of, and that's on the permitting side, that they like a voice recording option, an answering machine, essentially. That's not something that's available at this time. So right now it's either a written comment submitted to the DEQ website directly or the board directly. It's an email or it's a verbal comment that is included as part of that. So that does leave a lot of space for additional ways to capture information. You can also mail or fax.
Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add before I get to Meredith?
No, it's okay.
Okay, Meredith. Oh, you froze, perhaps. Meredith, can you hear us?
Portal, since they went remote.
Sorry, Meredith,
so
can you, I don't mean to interrupt you. Could you start over? We entered on the word portal. Start over for us.
Oh, okay. Just curious if all comments are viewable by the public.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
You'll see that on the last slide. I hyperlinked other people's comments for inspiration. So once we get into breakout rooms, if you want to click on that and scroll through. I don't know how we feel about. There are names attached to that, so think carefully about confidentiality, but they are public.
Great question. Any other questions?
Well, this is another follow-up based on that. Then is there a verification process, like the comments on the dress that you bought? They say this is a verified user, a verified consumer. Do they go back and say, yeah, this is a legit Commonwealth person? Or alternatively, I wonder about if this does get on enough radar and there are mounted strategic efforts, grassroots, to have alternate opinions and comments put in. Just how that would get weighed. I guess it's just, I guess that gets back to that idea of the circle of communication. Once you put them, once the comments are delivered, then what? And what happens with the review? And is there any kind of, I'm a therapist, so having a circle of communication, you know, having a need expressed, an opinion expressed, and then hearing that acknowledged is really a vital part of the process. So a couple questions there. So do we get verified? Would somebody want to make sure? Yes. Like when I would call Goodlat's office every week for about a year, they always, I just got a routine of here's where I live. You know, this is who is supposed to be representing me, and here are my complaints. So there was a way that it looked like they were verifying that I was a part of the constituency.
In my, oh, go ahead, Jess, you're more experienced in this than me.
After you.
I was going to say, in my experience, there isn't verification. And this kind of goes along with I think I saw a question in the chat about out of state. So there was one particular fight against a combined heat and power plant in Portsmouth that I was really active on and got very spicy about. And I was getting comments by soliciting people from like Maine and New Hampshire, and those, you know, those all went into the public record. So in my experience, they're not verified, not in the same way where perhaps to talk to your congressman, they make sure that you are in fact in their district. But others on this call have a lot more experience and may completely contradict what I'm saying. So I'll let Jess chime in.
No, I think you're right. It's not prohibited to only Virginia residents. They may give preference to Virginia residents, you know, in terms of oftentimes if they're summarizing comments, they may split those out and make a point to make a distinction. You know, we got X number from out-of-state residents. But yeah, they do ask for some kind of address requirements on town hall. There might be like a I'm not a robot type of thing. Sometimes, and this may not be specific to regulatory items, but when the DEQ does list an open comment period, sometimes they will ask you for your full address. And that's what can end up public. So please keep that in mind too. So if you have the town hall, you submitted it there, your comment, like Xander said, it's public facing. If you submit a comment on a permit and you're trying to help get that elevated, they're going to take all of those comments as a giant PDF and put that onto the public internet. So that's something to also keep in mind, what contact info you would or wouldn't want included. Eventually it will be made, it can be made or be public facing.
Thanks, Jess. Those are great questions, great technical questions that help people understand what their information is being used for and make, you know, the barrier to accessibility a little bit more transparent. So thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and move us into breakout rooms so we get a nice 15 minutes. I am going to open up 2 breakout rooms and I will stay behind in the main room and send y'all a reminder when time is almost up. You should get a join prompt on your screen and y'all each will have 1 to 2 facilitators in your group to answer more questions for you, open up the breakout room slides, and just help you out in general. So I'm going to see y'all in about 15 minutes. Please come back if you can. Just ask a few closing questions, and like one of our CCAN organizers likes saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth evaluating. So we want to make sure that this was helpful. So we'll just chat for a few minutes when you come back, and then we'll let you go about your way. So I'm going to go ahead and open those groups now, and I'll see you in just a moment.